Hi, everybody. Thanks so much for coming out. And then anyone afterwards who's watching this online, thanks for tuning in. I'm really excited to be launching this first episode of Wheel Talk. It's going to be a series where we'll be interviewing a range of notable people within the world of cycling. We'll be asking questions that we find interesting. We're also opening up the floor to all of you guys. So feel free to ask any questions and engage as we go through different topics. With those formalities out of the way, I'm extremely excited to introduce our first guest, Vaea Verbeeck. Vaea is a multi-time Canadian downhill national champion, 2 times Queen of Crankworx, and is one of the players at the forefront of the women's freeride movement. Vaea, thank you so much for taking the time to come chat with us tonight.
Thank you. Thanks for the intro. Thank you guys for showing up. And for those of you guys watching, really appreciate it. So thanks for having me.
So tonight we're going to talk a lot about sort of what you currently have going on, but I've done some deep diving through some podcasts of yours, and I wanted to highlight some early stuff. Not too much, just a little bit. Specifically, your first race. So you started riding pretty late at like 17, right? And a year later, you attended your first race. What was that?
Yeah, so I got into mountain biking at 17. And then the group of friends that I was riding with were all into downhill racing. So, I mean, within the first year of me riding at the local hill, Bromont, back east in Quebec, every other weekend, the boys would be out of town, and I say the boys because I was really the only girl, or there might have been one other girl, but from the other side of Quebec, so I'd never see her. But every other weekend, they'd be out of town at a race, and then I realized it was kind of lame to stay home and be in the bike park by myself. So very quickly, I started asking what was the next race, and like I wanted to kind of go with them and check out a new spot and ride bikes into new trails. So yeah, the first race I signed up for was in Mont Saint Anne, and the boys didn't tell me until we got to the registration office there, but it was the national championship race, not just the Quebec Cup or Canada Cup. It was like Canadian championships. And the lady at the administration was like as surprised as I was. She was like, that's her first race. Like I don't think it's allowed to like sign up for national champs as your first race. And my friends at the time, or my friend that were there with me, were locals from Mont Saint Anne. They were like, trust me, lady, she's going to be right on my ass. She's going to do great. And I was like, okay. So anyways, got signed up for Mont Saint Anne. It wasn't pretty. I may have taken a couple tumbles, but I finished. And my second year junior was my category. And I raced with Miranda Miller at the time as well. I got second. She was third, just to be clear. Probably the only time I've ever beaten Miranda as well. But that was that. And then in overall elite as well, I think I was 7th. So that gave me enough points to sign up for a World Cup. You needed like 40 UCI points. And I think 7th position was 40 UCI points. So that was a trip for sure.
It's amazing. So just for some context, tonight's not about me, but I rode Mont Saint Anne once, and I thought I was relatively good at the time. We flew out to Quebec to go race Mont Saint Anne, and I couldn't finish the track holding on to my handlebars. It was such a rough course, and at that point, I'd been racing for a while and was like ready for it. So showing up as your first race to race Mont Saint Anne, which is like the World Cup track where we test the fastest people in the world, is like amazing. Super cool.
Thank you. It's an extremely rocky terrain. It's extremely fast. So like the faster you go, the rougher it gets on the body, on the bike, on parts and everything. But thankfully, Bromont, which is the bike park where I learned to ride bikes, is quite rocky and technical as well. To the point where like after years of living in BC, going back to Bromont, I break parts every time I ride. And I used to be there not breaking parts. And my friends would come to Bromont, ride the bike park. They would break parts and hate it. And I was like, you must be rough on your bike. Like nobody here is having trouble. It's definitely like a skill that you cultivate as you live there. So going from Bromont to Mont Saint Anne was a friendlier approach than someone from lush, mossy BC going to Mont Saint Anne. That's for sure.
So from what I've gathered from some other interviews I've listened to, podcasts, before you went pro, you were working full time through the off seasons to pay for your racing. Can you share a bit what it's like working to support yourself while you're training for racing World Cups?
For sure. Biking was just my hobby. Like it was always just that. It was just what I loved. And I tried so many sports before biking and then I didn't get stuck on them because you kind of get to a certain point where you cap and you kind of just don't feel like there's any more progress, or I don't know. There was just no more challenge versus biking. It's like different weather, different conditions, different trails. You go traveling, you learn, it's always changing. You can always go bigger. You can always go faster. So I got stuck with mountain biking for sure. And, but it was just my hobby. It was just my passion, like the things I do when I'm not working. But I would the culture that I got brought into with mountain biking was very into racing. So I would go to races as well. But yeah, it does cost money. You do have to go and work and spend all your savings into racing. And that's what I did for many years, is work full time in the winter time. And then as the years went on and I was doing better at racing, I would take more and more time off in the summertime and spend it all. And it was a really fun time until you become more of an adult age and people start thinking that people as in like your mom and your, people that are stuck at home doing civil responsible decisions, but they judge you and they think you should quit what you're doing and just get a real job. And I've definitely considered that a couple of times because injuries come into play as well. And you realize you put so much effort, training, money, and then you get hurt. And it's just a lot of obstacles for the rewards. But you learn a lot. And eventually you just learn to just look at the big picture again and like the fact that you just do that for fun. And so the whole process of training, the process of recovering, the process of all the challenges should actually be also enjoyable, even if it's difficult. But to answer your question, because I'm really good at going, taking the long way around, I was just doing it for fun. Year after year, it got better. And through the injuries, I should say, I still progressed my riding. I was still getting faster, better. I was still getting better results, slowly and surely. So I was getting slightly better sponsorships and support every year. And by sponsorship, it started with product. It started with my bike sponsor. I rode for Intense probably for 4 or 5 years before Rocky Mountain. So I'd get some travel budget, not much, but like enough that, a couple of $1,000s is something you don't have to save up from work, And then I got on Rocky, and then that was way more travel budget. And then a couple more components and gear sponsorships became with some bonus structure. So if I did some results, I would hit some bonus money, travel expense, and then eventually salary. And then year after year was like inching a little bit forward to the point where at some point it was like my off-season work season was no longer September to April. It was October till January. And that was pretty cool. And after that, I started to just pull the plug and I started winning races. Like we're transitioning from like downhill racing background to then I transitioned to Crankworx racing. And that's when I started winning a lot of events and winning prize money and the overall prize money. And that's when I was like, I actually have $1 left in my bank account at the end of the summer. Like I actually have something left that isn't screaming, you must stop riding your bike and go to work. And so that's when I was like, well, I'll keep doing this year round.
So moving into Crankworx, you started racing downhill, made the shift to more multi-discipline events like Crankworx. What drove that move?
I'd say I was always traveling the World Cup circuit, which a lot of it is in Europe. And because you're very conscious of how you're spending every dollar, you're not going to go to Fort William, Scotland for the first World Cup. Usually that was paired with like Leogang in Austria or Val di Sole in Italy, but they were back-to-back weekends. So you do 2 weeks and then you come home and then later in the summer you go back to Europe. But sometimes you just stay in Europe and then boom, you're Crankworx round rolling around in Léger, France or Innsbruck, Austria. And so it was good to just stick around Europe for a little longer and hit Crankworx for fun in between World Cup races. So it used to be the in-betweener fun festival bike event to go to, and I would just sign up for the DH race and the pump track race because it's not going to like make me too tired for the DH race.
Right.
It looks very different now when I go to Crankworx. It's the downhill race. By the time I get to the downhill race event, which is like the 5th or 6th event within the week, I'm so dead that like all the other downhill girls just kick my butt for sure. It's a funny progress since when it originally started. But yeah, back then it was a long and slow, painful learning curve of realizing that as much as I'm a fast and strong downhill rider, on paper it wasn't translating. So whenever it was coming time to do a top to bottom race run, I have really bad arm pump issues. I don't know if you guys have experienced that, but you get that from motor riding or from when you go climbing, like you just, the forearm pain, and it basically gets you stuck in this claw position and you start braking way more than you want to or that you realize you are. You just don't feel anymore. Like it's extremely painful. But in the middle of a race run, you're full of adrenaline, so you don't really feel it, but you're definitely braking more than you should.
Mm-hmm.
So you'd seen my split times at World Cups. My first split was within a top 5. Second split, maybe a top 5. And then third and fourth split, I would like drop the anchors and finish like, I don't know, within top 10. Like 7th is kind of where I usually sat, but never got a podium at a World Cup. And it was just so defeating to put so much effort and seeing the speed is there, but not able to finish it. And in Crankworks, the courses tend to be a little bit shorter, or maybe not as steep or gnarly, or like there isn't like 100 of competitors like World Cups signing up, destroying the track, which makes it so much rougher. It makes it harder on arm pump issues. So it's just easier to just shred at Crankworks and maybe less pressure too.
There's surgery you can get for arm pump, right?
I considered it.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's not cool.
Yeah.
Literally just cutting through your wrist and then I think it lasts like 2 years.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I have a couple of friends that did it, and I spoke to them because yeah, it's making something that you love and your biggest passion in life be so painful and so defeating. Yeah, lots of tears over it.
To dive into something you mentioned for Crankworks, I would imagine as you're trying to be competitive throughout the whole week of racing, is it challenging when people come in for one-off events and are just really fresh for a one-off event and kind of like maybe throw you off your game if they're just focusing singular event and you're trying to be consistent the whole way through?
Yeah, it's extremely challenging. It's almost like it shouldn't be allowed.
Okay.
As the athlete that signs up for all the events and I mean, I've been there, right?
Yeah.
I've been that person that shows up to Crankworks just mainly for the downhill race and also maybe the pump track race, but basically I'm fresh for the downhill race. And then I became the rider that's trying to do a really good overall points ranking in Crankworks overall. So you sign up for dual slalom, speed and style, pump track, whip off, downhill. And then now I see the World Cup girls that show up and just focus on the last race. They can attend all the practice sessions. Meanwhile, I can't do a track walk because it's during the practice sessions for another event. I usually skip most practice sessions or just do one practice run a day instead of 3 hours or 4 hours of it every single day. So yeah, it's different. Luckily for me, Crankworks events have been hosted by the same like parks, so they would keep to the same downhill tracks. So I would kind of remember racing it the year before. You'd pray for good weather, so it's not so hard to just put it together quickly. Yeah, it's extremely challenging.
So do you think Crankworks is too condensed then? Like, would it be easier if it was spread out, or would it just be too diluted then?
We had some meetings with Crankworks about making, because there is an overall downhill prize money as well that some of the downhill girls like Tracy would chase. And we were definitely talking about making a minimum 2 events mandatory. So like nowadays, most of them race the slalom as well.
Right.
And it's so fun to watch them race other events like slalom or pump track, like almost like the good old World Cup days where everyone was racing 4-cross. Like that should be a thing.
Cool.
It is so fun.
Cool. Going from downhill into Crankworks, what kind of changes have you had to made to your lifestyle and training? Like how different is it competing in that style versus more traditional downhill racing?
Yeah, it's definitely got to structure a lot more the training sessions. I mean, it's similar, but just instead of doing a lot of the same strength training at the gym and then like a lot of downhill racing as practice, it's just like you got to break down all the events you do at Crankworks, like slalom and speed and style. So, for example, slalom, speed and style, you have gate starts. So you have to go to the BMX track, or if you have a gate in the yard, you can do like gate start practice, because that will maybe get you to like gain 0.4, 0.5 seconds per run. So over 2 runs, it's like if you're a second ahead of your opponent, that's just from gate start practice. So you try and do gate start practice. Speed and style, obviously, there's 2 trick jumps, and then the better you do your trick jump, the more points you get. And so the more likely you are to be successful. So you have to go session some trick jumps and work on your tricks on your slope bike, not just your hardtail, because you're racing the slope bike. Pump track, that's my nemesis for sure. Like my first ever bicycle mountain bike was a downhill full suspension double crown bike. So like I've learned backwards. I did downhill bike at a bike park, then I moved to BC, and then I got a trail bike and struggled for a long time because the North Shore climbing trails were not that sweet for someone who's learning. And then I got a hardtail, and I was terrified of the hardtail for many years. Still kind of am, but I'm finally breaking away from this.
So we should lobby North Cowichan to get a pump track in town.
Pump track and dirt jumps.
And dirt jumps, yeah. Dirt jumps. So back to training briefly. Chatting to some downhill people I know, they'll do this like taper coming into World Cup season where I don't know that much about it, to be honest, but it's very focused. There's the build up and then you try and peak at a specific point. I would imagine it's really hard to do that style of training where you're trying to do multiple different things over a wide spread of time. Like, do you have any kind of like build up and taper, or are you just sort of focusing more on just like a really broad skill set?
Yeah, I feel like for the downhill racing side of things, it's a lot easier. It's a bit easier, I think, to recreate a top to bottom time. Like you can put some like free lap poles maybe in time yourself, or go to a local race before the like World Cup season starts. Like there's always warm up races, like people were just in New Zealand doing crankworks as a warm up for this World Cup season coming up. For crankworks events, I mean, it's hard to find a slalom track and things like that to prepare. We do a lot of digging to build them ourselves to kind of just recreate the kind of switchbacks we're looking for. There is definitely a build up in how much bike time you're doing, because you know that when you show up at Crankworks, it's a week of 8 a.m. to 8 or 9 p.m. on the bike. And I'll be from starting at a practice session to then doing your qualifying runs to then doing the ladders that like will establish who gets into finals. And then there's usually like a break period. But during the break period, there's probably a downhill session practice. So you go to that, you swap bikes again, and you come back for finals in the evening, and then you race finals until 8 or 9 p.m. So it's a lot of saddle time for 5-6 days in a row. So the 2 weeks prior to Crankworks, you try and very much do multiple riding sessions. So you'll have a morning session, a midday session, evening session, to try and kind of recreate how much energy you're going to be spending. Right. And then the week prior, you just chill a little bit to refill the energy cup. But yeah, just trying to normalize the insane amount of energy you're about to burn.
Yeah. So to touch on the fact that, you say there's, if you're racing downhill, there's lots of opportunities to practice downhill prior to coming into a World Cup. There's not a lot for Crankworks style events. Do you think there's opportunity for like mini Crankworks-esque series?
Definitely, and that's actually a thing that's happening right now with Crankworks Summer Series.
Right.
So as of the pandemic year where the World Tour was canceled, thankfully the Crankworks team is based in BC, so we got to have the BC Crankworks Summer Series in 2020.
Yeah.
And then they brought that to New Zealand as like a local oriented, like race with your heroes kind of energy. Okay. So they did that in New Zealand, in the southern side of New Zealand, versus the World Tour is on the north end of New Zealand. They do it as the BC Summer Series as well, like between Silver Star, Sun Peaks, and Kicking Horse. And then they also brought it for the first time last summer in Quebec. So in Quebec City, they had like a pump track, a slalom, an air DH, and all these little like more community-friendly events.
Yeah, cool.
It'd be super cool to bring more of it here.
Yeah, and that's all under the Crankworks umbrella?
That's through Crankworks.
Yeah. It'd be interesting to see if like local municipalities or cycling clubs and stuff could pull off that kind of multi-discipline.
Oh,
race.
Totally. It is so much fun. And it doesn't have to be through Crankworks. It can just be like this bike festival that's just celebrating all the mountain biking disciplines that we are, graced with.
Although I guess it's maybe challenging for more like enthusiast level riders because you need all the different bikes and stuff.
Oh, a trail bike goes a long way.
Yeah.
Especially in 2023, a trail bike, you can race a downhill race, you can ride the slalom track, you can pull up at a trick jump. just not a pump track, but a couple of hardtails and
Okay.
share the hardtails with your friends. And honestly, we us Crankworks riders do that too. Traveling across the world with 4 bicycles because you're doing 5 different disciplines is super tiring. I bring like a multiple change of clothes on my travel days because airport transfers with 2 bike boxes that have 4 bicycles plus your luggage plus your bike bag plus your helmet or your backpack. And your flight's late, of course. So you have to run to make the next thing. It's ridiculous. So sometimes some people will like be in Europe to do a bunch of race tours and then they'll just borrow their friend's hardtail when they're not practicing. Because,
Okay.
there's only 2 people allowed on the pump track at a time.
Right.
So when you get to the top, as long as everyone's racing the same pedals or flat pedals, you can easily swap.
Cool.
Yeah.
Island Cup Series, Crankworks style multi-edition events.
Watch out.
Yeah. So somewhere along the line, you started to add more freeride focused events to your portfolio. What's it like adding further diversification to an already very diverse skill set that you've had to maintain?
It was a really like natural thing to do because going from downhill only to then learning my first slalom racing or speed and style, like learning tricks, going to pump track, learning like very basic skills like pumping and cornering. It's just the process of learning is actually really enjoyable, especially if you can obviously notice the progress. And if you're learning something brand new, it's a lot easier to ramp up the progress right away. So it's kind of the same with freeride. And overall, this learning of basic skills through like trying to dial out the Crankworks events. I tried my first whip off events at Crankworks and it was like some of the biggest jumps I've ever ridden at the time. And it was so exciting. I was so scared. And I was just like, people believed in me. They were like, I've seen you jump at like Whistler on A-Line or Dirt Merchant. Like, you're a great jumper. Like, you should totally give it a go. And then you just get over yourself. You trust them. You give it a go. And then you realize it was this best time of your life. And you're just running back up the hill to do it more. So then it's kind of like unlocks this idea. It's like, oh, I didn't know I would love that, but I actually love that. And
Cool.
Yeah, that feeling is just something that I've always chased. If I love it, I just go do it more.
Amazing.
Yeah.
So women's freeride is gaining more media attention lately. It seems to be on quite an upward trajectory. Obviously, more room to go, but it seems to be trending the right direction. What factors do you think have led to this sort of more recent boom?
I would say there's been more opportunities for us to show up. And then over the years, as maybe less than a handful of us are keen to sign up for those events outside of your original contracts of very racing oriented contracts, then the younger generation will like see, oh, like that's a thing now, that's possible, that looks super cool. And so they do their homework at home. They go maybe ride some dirt jumps, or they go ride their downhill bikes and go ride more freeride stuff, put out some clips, like some videos out, instead of being so racing focused. And you look 5 to 10 years after that, from the original time where some of the girls like us showed up to do that. And then now there's a whole pool of riders that are super competent, super strong. They have the skills, they have the experience. And then the events are like, or I guess we're asking for those women's category. We're still fighting for women's category for other events, but across the board now, a lot of them have women categories, and we're showing up, and every year it turns up like huge amounts.
So what's it like being at the leading edge of this sort of movement?
Well, I think I'm just really grateful that I'm on this end of things, like I could have easily been, 5 years older and just missed the whole ship, and then be like older and looking back at the younger ones being like, that is such a cool opportunity. Like, I would have loved for that to happen. Not that you can't make it happen on yourself, but you maybe don't just know it until you see it, Like I said, if it was just for being surrounded by racers around me, I would be doing your product of your environment, basically, right? So now that we're out there showing it, people are seeing it, and you get the choice to choose, that looks so exciting, I want to try that, versus just seeing the one direction discipline that used to be what we used to be exposed to.
Cool. Many freeride events are jam style with no points, no winners. Do you prefer participating in that kind of environment, or would you prefer to see something more structured with like a competitive focus? what would you like to see out of free ride?
Am I allowed to answer both
Yeah.
as an answer? Yeah,
Yeah,
both
sure.
is the best of both worlds for sure.
Cool.
I think as the early stages, it was really perfect for us to have places to just go jam together and learn from each other, work together. You definitely progress a lot faster when you see one of your friends do something and you get the chance to just, I don't know, just get excited to do it as well and try it as well and like bounce off each other and get the tips on how to do things versus if it's a competition and you're each to your own, not because you're so competitive against them, but just because there's a competitive level, it's more stressful. You're very much in your own head focusing on what you got to get done. And it's a lot less about collaboration as a group.
Right.
So I think those events of collaborating and just having fun and doing that as a group is the best time in the world. And that's where you learn the most. And then also having a stage where you can take it into a competition, I think is sweet. And that's definitely happening as we speak.
As an area that's seeing lots of growth, how do you see women's freeride progress as a discipline? Are you happy with the current separation of women's only events? Sounds like you alluded to this, no. Or would you prefer more integration with established events such as Rampage?
Yeah, I'm definitely always been a big supporter of everyone together, everyone equal, like boys and girls together. Yeah, like I'm not meant to compete against the boys, but having a women's category in an event where there's also a men's category is just the best of both worlds for me. I think it's important to have those places where, same with like, it doesn't have to be men, women, you know, like you look at kids looking at kids, they find that so much more relatable than like watching me or you do something and think, oh, well, they can do that, but I can't do that. So just having this group of people that you find so much more relatable, and therefore you actually believe that you can do it yourself and then go ahead and push yourself more. So having those spaces, I think, is key, but also having the main goal is to have everyone on the big stage together. Yeah, I definitely want a women's category in Rampage on the same day with the boys.
Do you think that's coming?
We're working really hard on this. I will not comment any further.
Okay.
I wish.
Cool. With all the different disciplines you're now competing in, how does that affect things like bike setup? Do you make big changes from event to event, or do you prioritize a more consistent feel?
You have to. You have to set up your bike for the event you're going to. If you asked me that when I was just racing downhill World Cups, I might have said, yeah, my bike setups are generally speaking similar. If it's a really steep track, you might want to put like extra spacers to sit up a little bit, or maybe soften your shock so you're sitting back a little bit more. But when I go between riding Prevost, that's the biggest example. Riding Prevost, which is high speed, bumpy, like race style, to then go ride like a really big jump line. And by big jump line, I mean something that you can't even find here. Like you have to go to a big freeride event where they've built the track for the event, and that's a whole different sport, you know? So you have to set it up for that, because if I go with my Prevost settings there, my rebound's really fast, my suspension's a lot softer because it's like trying to like get all the bumps here, versus there, the way you're ramping into the lip with so much gravity force, it will just blow right through your travel. And if your rebound's fast, you're just not going to make it to the landing, unfortunately. So very different settings.
Is it hard making that transition back and forth between like your regular riding setup and a more free ride focused setup?
I don't think so. It's almost like if I had the same bike, like if I had a free ride bike and a racing bike, right. You know, I used to only ride my downhill bike with a coil shock. So that was a bit more tricky. Like you definitely want a higher rate coil on the big jumps. But then when I would break in a brand new build, like you guys would build up my new bike like a month ago when I went to Mexico, and I brought it to Prevost for a day just to like break it in as is with a super hard coil. It rode horribly on Prevost, right. But I just wanted to feel it as is. But then on the big jumps, it was perfect. As of recently, the last build that we did was with an air shock, and I'm actually still figuring that out. So I rode Prevost. It was fantastic. It felt so good. And then I went and rode my friend's backyard with like really big hits, and I had the shock pump out every lap, like trying to figure out and make it harder. And yeah, it's definitely something to adjust. But I think once you've found your setting for the big one and the setting for the the riding, it's not super hard to bounce between the two.
Cool. So similar to chatting about downhill, doing local races, growing up, getting into World Cups, Crankworks, how there's sort of a bit of momentum there. How's a free rider supposed to like start doing these big free ride events? Like where's the steps to that? And do you think there's even possibility for steps to something like that? Like it's not like we can have like 50-foot jumps in Duncan here, or is there? What would you like to see there?
I mean, I think we're definitely. I see the possibilities are there, and I think the community is excited for that kind of stuff to come in. Like as of now, like the latest jumps being built on Provo at the bottom, that's so exciting, and that's opening any day now, and that'll be a really fun, much more friendly jump line for the community to access. And I mean, yeah, you gotta love it, because I'm happily going to drive an hour to Stevie's Park to ride their jumps. Yeah. But it'd be lovely to have their jumps right here. Yeah. And there's some, they're just maybe not built the best. So like we needed to go with our shovels, put in the time to build, ride them, just build those skills, jumping skills. And yeah. I
guess from like an organic growth standpoint, it's probably not as realistic to have these like massive jumps just built by enthusiasts out in the woods, because the scale to make that happen is so much bigger. I guess maybe that's part of why we don't see that as much.
It is extremely expensive, because it's no longer bringing your shovel with your friends and a couple buckets of dirt. It's machine, it's fuel, it's time, it's permits. You know, you can't just like sneak into the woods and block the entrance so nobody knows where your trail is. Like you have to bring a machine to build that kind of stuff. So it would be cool for sure.
Okay, in addition to physical training, I would imagine there's a lot of mental preparation that's required to do the things you do. What kind of practices do you use to mentally prepare for different events, especially when you're considering free ride stuff where the hits are big and the consequences are high?
Personally, I think it's just a lot of experience under me, and having gone through the process of being okay being a complete beginner at something and just swallowing that pill and being okay at not being good at something, and then learning and putting in the time. Doing something that you don't know how to do is actually really scary, especially if it's got high consequences like big jumps. But then resting on the experience of every time I've gone to a really challenging World Cup track and there's a road gap and there's the option B line, of course, but do I want to take the 4-second penalty? No. So you challenge yourself over my career. I've challenged myself to do those technical gaps, challenge myself trying a whip off competition, riding the whip off jumps anyways. At Crankworks, it's just getting over that hurdle. And honestly, it is no different to someone in the local community thinking that double's cool, but I'm going to go around it every time, and being scared of doing that one double that maybe their friends can do, but they just never tried to do it. There is literally no difference between that mindset and what it does to your brain than to me when I look at an 80-footer.
I want to chat about your sponsors a little bit. People bounce around. It seems like throughout your career, you've had some pretty long-lasting relationships with your sponsors. Can you share a bit just how those relationships have evolved over the years?
For sure. I was recently going through the list the other day, and a lot of my sponsors are like 8 to 10 years lasting. Makes me feel like I'm no longer this junior girl that was starting a career. But no, it's super special. I have nothing against looking at opportunities from other companies, and I think the biking companies that we're graced with are really cool, and they all do really good products. So everything can be considered for sure. But it's been really sweet to just build those family feels and connections with my people, and they've seen me go through like different phases of my career, right? So a lot of it was based around downhill racing in the beginning, and then when I brought the fact that I wanted to do more Crankworks and no more DH racing, I would go to Mont Saint Anne to go visit my family more so in Quebec once a year. They were, it's not like they were fully confident about it because I didn't have any experience doing it, but they were like, if that's what you want to do, let's go for it. And then And yeah, I did it and it went really well. That said, it sounds a lot nicer than it actually was. What happened is when I was my last year racing World Cups, I was sponsored by a component company and they had a nice pit space for me, a mechanic at the races. And the year after is when I wanted to do more crankworks and it was looking promising and I was trying to sell the idea to them, and their vision, I guess, of the following year was way more World Cup racing and not having me under that umbrella anymore. So I got dropped, long story short, and it was like late in the fall when contract negotiations happened. So that was super stressful. And so that took a lot of confidence and belief in the whole I'm doing this because I love this kind of mindset. And I went to New Zealand and spent a month just training and riding a lot prior to the start of the crankwork season, which starts in New Zealand in March of that year. And everything went well. At the time, I still had Rocky Mountain. I still had D80 components. And like I kind of had been racing for Troy Lee Designs gear, but it was only after that week at Crankworks where I won a couple races. They were like, oh yeah, we can totally take care of you this year. I was like, I know, thanks. So that year where I started, results showed on paper, that's when I they knocked at my door instead of me being like, can I please get more support from you? But I have been riding for those sponsors for a long time. Mm-hmm. It's just that I made a living and I got paid really what I was meant to be paid as of like 5 years ago, 2018.
So a lot of these brands you've grown with from like kind of like basic grassroots level all the way up. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, definitely. My very first jersey purchased was a Troy Lee design, and then Oakley and Troy Lee were my first sponsors, gear sponsor back in Quebec. And they were just through like the reps, and then the rep would like then give me the contact of like the Canadian dealer, and then the Canadian would then give me the contacts to the HQ people, usually based in the US. Over the years you get some more connection building and just doing what I can to keep them happy and do as much biking as I can and put them out there and make them happy. So
cool. Yeah. You kind of touched on this, but when you've made these switches in career, you've moved around a lot. Is that something that usually comes with like contract renegotiation, or is it pretty like seamless shifting around most of the time?
There's a bit of both, I think. I can't even remember when I've swapped sponsors. Like I said, like I went from Intense to Rocky would be the one major swap that I've done. And that was very much, like just building my own set of sponsors. So like when I was racing for Intense, it was this European team manager and they had a whole thing. And I think I was allowed to still race for Troy Lee Designs, but it was like under their components. Like I was no longer on Fox suspensions. I was on whatever other suspension they were running. Mm-hmm. So it was kind of like, I've always liked the idea of reaching out to brands myself and building the bike I want to ride, riding the gear that I want to ride in, versus riding for a middleman team manager that decides for you and they take a cut out of it too. So yeah, Rocky called me back and I was like, sweet, I'll ride for Rocky. I want to ride for Shimano. I want to ride for Fox suspension. And like to this day, going more into free ride, Fox is trying to move me to Marzocchi and I'm like, but I want to ride Fox. Like I love Fox. Yeah, when I started doing well enough, that's when I started saying no to some offers and saying that I was worth what I was asking, and just going the year with buying that part because you don't want to ride for the contract that they were offering you. Literally today, I got a message from a girlfriend that was like asking for my help on how to respond politely to a sponsor and saying, no, I am worth more than this. Takes a lot of guts, but that's literally looking out not just for yourself, but also for the rest of the community. Like the next riders that are going to ask for a sponsorship, if I settle for just product, you're going to have to settle for just product because the sponsor thinks they can get away with just that. Yeah. We're putting our lives out there and it's pretty exciting to watch, and you're selling product. We should be paid for it. Yeah. It's a whole learning curve, honestly, and I think it's definitely been a trial and error for a long time. And the year that I learned a lot is when I got approached by a different bike manufacturer, and So I was in renegotiation with Rocky for a new contract, and I told them what I was wanting. And we were kind of negotiating. Like always, usually you ask for something, you get a little bit under, and you try to find a happy middle. And then I got approached by someone else, and I said, well, or I was thinking, I like Rocky. I don't want to go anywhere, but I could consider writing for you for this much. Not that I would tell them that, but I was like, if you want to take me off of Rocky, who has the right of refusal, first right of refusal, meaning they can match someone else's contract, and I'm stuck with Rocky. So that's the year I learned a lot, because I would get that company to offer me way more, which they would. And then Rocky would be like, we're listening. Oh, here's the back pocket. We want to keep you. And I was like, great, because I want to stay with you guys. And so anyways, you learn a lot about what your worth is actually versus the original conversation. If you hadn't talked to any other people, other brand companies, you would have just had this one conversation with your current sponsor, and you would just found a middle ground of like trying to figure out and feel how much you're worth. Versus if the rest of the industry is telling you you're worth way more, then you're worth way more.
Doesn't sound all that different from like the regular labor market.
I would definitely, and that's what I always tell my friends that try and get better sponsors, is like always go look at other sponsors and outside the spectrum. Even if you would only want to ride for those 2 companies, go for like 5 more, and then you might get a response back from one of those 5, and maybe you don't want to ride for them as much, but it'll give you an idea of how much you're worth, and it gives you a backup plan to then go to your current sponsor, someone you want to ride for, and be like, this is what I need. Confidently ask for them for that. And then maybe you'll get a little bit less, and then maybe you'll still take the better deal, or you'll take the now better deal, but not as good with the brand you actually want to ride for. Anyways, it's a whole learning process, but if you have questions, hit me up.
I think that ship sailed.
Not that
for
I'm
me.
killing it, but I think I've learned a lot for sure.
In addition to racing, you've done some larger scale media work. Can you share some of the contrast between structured events and putting out video projects?
Yeah, and I still have pretty little experience in filming. I'd like to do more of it. I honestly find that super intimidating, because the product in the media product that I'm trying to get out there, I have this idea of what I want it to look like, and it's this ridiculous perfectionist idea that is so impossible to replicate. Not impossible, but I'm not obsessive at training. So I find it very intimidating to go into a media project. But again, with the same approach as I do everything else, I try and keep it fun. So I like doing projects with like another rider, so it's not just all eyes on me, and or go somewhere for fun, focus on the riding, and then the riding ends up being pretty cool. So we think, well, maybe we should just film it, and then you film it. And I have some friends that are filmers, so we kind of keep the environment very fun and just more so like we're all riding, but it's also film each other. But it requires a lot more planning. You're the one organizing it versus a race organizer, and you're just showing up at a race, and everything is ready for you.
Right.
It's a different beast for sure.
Right. Do you find your sports marketing degree has been useful in your career as a professional athlete? Have you used that much?
I mean, I think indirectly, it definitely helped me understand. So I did 3 years in sports marketing and management. It helped me learn a lot of English because that was English speaking. Yeah. I only spoke English since like I don't know, I guess when I started biking. 17 is when I would get pro bikers from BC or internationally. They would come based out of Bromont to ride between their races, like between Mont Saint Anne or the US races. And their team managers were some of my friends, and they would just have me go ride with them, or they would like ask me to show them the local trails. And so I had to speak English. But back to your point, 3 years of school in English, broadened my vocabulary, then moved to BC. Dealing with sponsorships, understanding what the person in an office doing the team manager job, like understanding what they need, what their deliverables to their bosses is. And so understanding what they need from me to make their job easy. And if their job is made easier, it makes my job easier. That's definitely been helpful to speak that language. And maybe, I don't know. I think I've been very selfish and just like doing what I like doing the most, not so much worried about what the industry wants from me, because that helps with my longevity in my career is like I love what I'm doing. But it is also something to be said about understanding what the industry loves seeing right now, and can I be a part of that and provide to that, and that helps my career longevity as well.
Cool. You recently moved to the Cowichan Valley.
I did. I'm local.
What brought you here, and why did you choose Duncan as your new home base?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely came to Duncan for many years. As I've been living in BC for 10 years now, and originally in Nordvan for a handful of years, and in the interior of BC for a handful of years. But I would spend, when I lived in Nordvan, I would just do some weekend trips, and we'd go ride with Stevie or Mark and those guys and ride Provoke because we were training for downhill racing. So I loved coming here, always loved Provoke for sure. And then living in the interior and traveling, a couple of years ago, I spent like a month, rented an Airbnb here and spent a month of just training. Specifically, we were like setting up cones up in the gravel pit above Zuhalem and do like some slalom or flat corner practice. And so I spent a month here. And I think over the last 10 years of living in BC, I always thought the island was so great, but I always thought viewing, and as most outsiders will think, is it's like, oh, it's a ferry, it's so far, it's so expensive to get back to the mainland. But when I spent a month living here, I realized I don't want to be anywhere else. Like, I don't have to get off the island. If anything, in the wintertime especially, all the homies come over to the island because it is the best place for riding and training. So yeah, got a place here, and it's literally full of guests all the time because people and friends and family love to visit because the island is awesome, and it's a beautiful place to visit, whether you're biking or not biking. It's awesome.
Amazing. So I guess touching on going way back to the start of our conversation about like free ride jumps and things like that, if this is your home base and you need jumps to ride, what's that going to look like?
Good question. I think I'm not bored yet. That's for sure. There's just so much riding around. And to be fair, when I'm traveling places, riding super gnarly things, it's really nice to come home and just chill and enjoy the like beautiful forests and the beautiful trails and not send it super hard. But yeah, eventually it will definitely take some of that. And, you know, I'm kind of thinking like, okay, what do we have with the Stevie legacy or like the Geordie's legacy? And, you know, we have parts, we have insane builders, we have amazing riders. There's definitely trails out there. They're maybe just not sanctioned yet. Yeah, I think there's a lot of room to grow.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
And recently you've been spending time at Reese Wallace's new place, right?
Well, I mean, yeah, we ride a lot, trail bikes, Zuhalem, e-bikes, whatever. Yeah. But this past week, I rode his yard features. That was definitely the biggest features I've ridden on the island.
Cool. So there is stuff close by if you know where to look and you got the right connections.
Yeah, definitely. He wants people to ride with. Not everybody wants to ride that stuff.
I'm not saying just go show up to Reese's house, by the way.
But I mean, he wants people to ride with. I think the session earlier this week was the first time other people wanted to ride his yard. Okay. It's not chill, but I'm trying to prepare for something that's less chill. So back to your point earlier, I'm trying to make myself uncomfortable because I'm about to be way more uncomfortable.
Yeah. Which leads really well into my next question. You're off to Darkfest in South Africa in a few weeks. What is that like? It's
kind of like before we sat down to talk, it's like I don't think about it. It's kind of nerve-wracking. You don't want to think about it until it's happening. And when it's happening, it's not as bad as you thought it was going to be. You just trust the process. But I've definitely looked up to that event and always thought it was such a sick event. And the riding is insane, but it's so well built. And it's in a crazy setting. And I've done some freeride events recently leading me up to this. So it's a big goal of mine. I'm really, really excited to be heading there. But I'm heading there next weekend, but I'll be in Spain a little bit for a week to ride this other bike park that has really big jumps too.
Cool.
Because I wanted to show up after riding really big stuff. So I feel like the big stuff isn't that crazy anymore.
Right.
Yeah.
Are there many other women going?
I actually don't really know. I heard some of the girls that were going there, but I didn't know how many. I think there was a handful there last year. I just don't know if all of them are going back. And I got a message earlier. One of the girls said like, I heard you're going to Darkfest. Can't wait to see you there. And I'm like, I didn't know she was coming. That's awesome.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Because this will be the first year that there's women at that event, right?
Last year there was some.
There were too.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and I
awesome.
was definitely watching every bit of it. Like, I was so excited for them to be there.
Yeah.
And it's like at a time where like it was an event where there didn't used to be a women, not that there's a category, it's just a session. So
Yeah.
there didn't used to be women wanting to show up there, but you didn't know if you could ask to go or if you wanted to go. Like, am I prepared for this? And it's happening in April, and it's right before formation in Utah. So like there's a few things that you're trying to be like super fresh for. Last year I spent a month in Utah leading up to formation. So yeah, just choices. But now I was definitely asking for it.
Awesome.
Yeah.
That's all I have for you. I want to ask everyone here, does the audience have any questions at this point?
So you'd spoken about being injured. Do you have a process for coming back from a crash? Not even if it's not an injury, just how do you prepare for the next attempt at it?
Thank you. I think first you just establish what the injury looks like on timeline. So, am I looking at 2 weeks, or am I looking at 6 weeks? Am I looking at 2 months? Once you've established that, usually you're literally still in the surgeon table and he tells you how long you're out for, and you look at the calendar and see what's the next the next event I can attend, You're that antsy about it. So usually you just build a plan to be back for that event because that's a realistic timeline. Depending what is going, like what kind of injury you're dealing with, like if you've had full on surgery or a broken bone or ligaments or whatever it might be, there's a period of time where after the surgery for at least a week, you just need to complete rest. Like just forget about the outside world, just sleep, eat really good nutrients, hydrate a lot. And I mean, forget about the outside world. That's not true. Like you still want to go outside with your friends. Maybe they're shuttling. So maybe you can be the shuttle driver. I've done that a couple of times, go out, get some sunshine, try and get some fresh air so that you're mentally content with life and you're still socializing, seeing your friends. That's usually the first week though. Like I don't do too much physical activity because it is very draining and you just want to give your body full rest. But as soon as that's kind of over, the next part is to get as active as you possibly can. So if you're out from a foot, you go to the gym and you do some pull-ups, or maybe you go kayaking, like anything upper body. If your upper body is out, you can go on a hike. You can, you're just trying to do any opposite activity you can do, so that you're still active, happy. And then after that, when you've gone through the timeline that your bone needed for healing or your ligament needed for healing, then you can, and also before that as well, you can start gym, like strength training, physio, like band work, lightweight work, and eventually that'll just ramp up. So you're doing heavier, and then maybe some like low impact cycling. Like I just went through a recent injury at my shoulder, and so I think after a week just hiking, I was on the road bike, like in the gym, and then week 2 I took my road bike somewhere and I was riding roads, and next thing you know I'm riding gravel roads, and week 3 I think I was on my trail bike, and you just slowly progress. And honestly, you really enjoy every little bit of it, because once you've been sitting off any bike for 2 weeks or any activities for 2 weeks, the smallest activity is so exciting because back to being fully alive is just at reach. So yeah, I don't know, I think it's just embracing where you're at and trying to enjoy every bit of positivity out of it, and look forward to doing what you love again. And hopefully the crash you had didn't spook you too much to do the things that you loved. Like even if you had an accident, you probably learned a lot about what happened, what went wrong. Probably didn't pay attention. That's usually what happens. So yeah, get back on the horse.
How did you find, like, when you were doing downhill racing and stuff, like the mental aspect, like how did you find dealing with it? Like I find when I'm racing, sometimes I get in my head and I get nervous. How did you find like doing that?
Thank you. That is true. As soon as you're put under pressure, and you might even like feel that when you're out riding with your friends, and then all of a sudden you guys are taking clips of each other, and it's like, oof, I'm getting filmed for this hit. I better do it harder, better, faster. I think it's just, the trick is to recreate that pressure in your normal everyday life so that when you show up there, it's not the first time you're put under pressure. So yeah, for me, when I go ride, and if I do like a GoPro run and I'm filming it, I know my GoPro run, I want it to look good. I want it to be fast. So I'm putting that pressure on me. So you do that. And if you do that all the time, and you're not all the time, but more often than not, you put yourself under that kind of pressure, it becomes way more normal. And then it doesn't feel so pressure, you know? And so you show up there and it's just another day in the office. Yeah, just like filming. Honestly, I used to be feeling so much pressure being filmed. It's like, this needs to be the one. It's like, no, you can just stay not so rigid on your bike, stay smooth, say the same thing that you always do. Yeah, maybe you try a little harder, and that's actually cool because it makes you a better biker to try a little harder. But yeah, just do it more often, recreate the same pressure feeling at home, and then racing feels normal.
To piggyback on Kyson's question, in some of the podcast stuff I listened to from you, you mentioned a bit of a shift in your racing from sort of putting like lots of pressure on yourself at events to focusing a bit more on the fun. Would that kind of tie into that angle?
Yeah, you just realize that it's not worth all of it if you're not actually having a good time. And the reason why I'm doing it is because it's my absolute passion hobby, you know? Mm-hmm. It did take the passing of Stevie to really switch that switch in my head, right, and realizing how freaking fun he was and how good he lived his life, and just how crazy life can be and just can be gone tomorrow. Yeah. And not to say like YOLO and launch yourself off, you know, but just more so that's when I stopped worrying about, you know, savings and buying a house and getting a real job, like all these creeping at thoughts that my family and friends at the time would like get in my head. That's when I was honestly like, screw all of this. I'm definitely doing what I love, and I'm going to go year by year. And honestly, from that day on is when everything clicked, and my writing spoke and translated so much better than before. And I think it was just getting rid of all that society pressure telling me, if you're not going to get it done, you better stop and get a real job. Mm-hmm. It was just like, this is where I want to be, and I'm going to do it as long as I can.
Let's go. Quit your job.
If you love your job, keep your job. If you don't love your job, quit your job.
First of all, thank you so much for doing this on behalf of our local community and the internet at large. Really grateful for your time and your sharing your experiences. This is really great.
Thank you.
You spoke a little bit to the importance of having fun with this thing that you're doing. And I think for a lot of people who take something that they're passionate about and they transition to doing it as a career, as a professional, it can change your relationship with that passion. I'm wondering if you can speak to how you find balance between making all the time and space you need to develop as a professional athlete, but then also still nurturing the fun that you have for this passion.
Thank you. That's a really, really good question. It definitely goes, and you really try to root yourself with the original idea of like the fact that the feeling you get while you're on your bike is the best feeling ever, and you just want to recreate that. But at a certain point, it does come with a lot of stressful, challenges. And you see some people in the community, like some of your fellow friends that are also pros, and the way that some of them take it is very much like a job. So like instead of just going riding for fun with them, they make it work, like as work. It's like, taking phone clips or filming or training, like going for like sprint intervals, or I don't know, like maybe even just riding a trick jump, which should be the most fun thing ever. But then if you're putting that pressure on yourself to go there because you have a goal of landing that trick that you need for the event that you're competing for, and then you can't land it and you get extra frustrated. You know, it's so easy to get overly frustrated because it has the pressure that it comes with it. But I think just observing some of my fellow competitors or fellow athletes and how they handle it, and how in some instances I don't like what I'm seeing, and I'm making sure that I'm not taking that path, I also have been there when I raced World Cups, and I was getting so flustered and so, so sad and so, yeah, just angry with the fact that I wasn't getting the results that I knew I could put out, but I just couldn't get there. I realized how unhappy I was and how this all didn't make sense at all. And I've made a lot of changes to completely change that and that mindset, and maybe not take myself so seriously and just be super flexible with everything. So for me, it's like I have a general idea of how much training time I need to put into different skills in order to line me up to be ready for my end goal. But I'll definitely not be like going to the gym if it's bluebird and sunny outside, knowing it's going to be pissing rain tomorrow. Like I'll just like things like sounds simple, but as simple as that, like just being flexible, not turning down a friendly hang or a ride just because you know you're going to be tired because you got this other training session. It's just adapting and just learning and keeping in mind the big picture of just being happy at the end of the day. It sounds really simple to just like doing it for fun, but honestly, it creeps on you without you knowing. So check yourself, having friends that check with you and make sure that you're still the happy, bubbly person you were once. So it's a fine line.
Yeah, thanks, Alec. That's a good question.
In the beginning, how hard was it to adapt to some of the changes that came along with the career?
Do you mean like when I went from downhill racing to Crankworks and like how different that whole lifestyle was? I mean, thankfully, I had people to look up to. And I think it's the same with your previous question as well, with like making sure I'm keeping everything for fun, is you look up to some people that are doing it well, or they have been doing it for longer than you have. And so for me, looking up to people that had done Crankworks for longer, and being inspired by how they did it, or maybe they were mixing Crankworks and then doing some videos on the side during the off season. I thought that was super cool, and them as an athlete as a whole, I thought was a really cool package and something that I was thriving for. And talking to those people, asking them how they're doing it. I'm now have established myself a few different times in my career, and now I'm the person that's getting messages from other riders that also want to change their career and asking how I went about it or asking for some advice. And it's just a small, it's a small world. It's a big family, the biking world. So we're all pretty mellow people that enjoy being in the outdoors, doing fun things on bikes. So we can ask each other and support each other.
Awesome. Well, I think we're going to close it up. Vaea, thank you so much for coming out. Thank you so much for chatting. I guess touching on the note about pros being accessible and chatting about what it's like doing all these different things. Like, thank you for making yourself accessible to us, to all these people watching online. Like, there's a lot of hurdles, a lot of challenges in life, bikes, racing, and I think getting some insight into what you've gone through, what you're doing is a huge resource for everybody. So thank you so much.
Well, I really appreciate that. Thank you. And thank you for creating this space for us to make it happen. Thanks for all of you guys for listening, and I hope that you enjoyed. I'm seeing some smiles, so it makes me smile, but thank you. I don't know. We're all just individuals doing our own thing and figuring it out. And I think bikes are pretty cool. So I'm happy that you guys like them too.
That's a wrap. Thanks, guys.